Do you want me to restart that or? Okay. I'm just calling to order the meeting April 19th, 2023 of the Airport Advisory Board, our regular meeting. And I've called the meeting to order. I'm going to take a roll call. I'll just call out the names. Voting members, Chris Nordstrom. Here. Steve Anderson. Here. Eric Moose. Tim Combrecht. No, Tim may not be present. Seems absent. Brian Cleary, that's myself, present. Brett Boyer. Here. Mike Jankowski. Here. I'm going to call out the alternates. Frank O'Connell. Here. Joan Genter. Here. Welcome all. I think the next, well, I will confirm for the record, we have a quorum of voting members and are able to conduct business. With that, I'm going to call for Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, item 3 is call for conflicts of interest. I noted next to this action, really we don't need to take any action on it, but I would just call, are there any conflicts of interest that need to be brought to the attention of anyone? Having heard of none, I'll proceed to agenda item number 4, which is changes to the agenda. It's really confirmation of the agenda and changes that is necessary. I'll take the liberty, if I could, just starting off on this. When I put the agenda together, I struggle a little bit with just kind of ordering things, but upon reflection, I think it would be wise for us, and I would recommend that we take the staff report, item 5B, Airport Deputy Director position, update by Phil Cummins, and we move that, strike it from there, move it down under 7B of the agenda, which deals with Airport Director position. That way we could just have Phil tell us what he has to say on that position and we can discuss and take action as appropriate. So that is one of the changes. The other change that I would propose is that under 6 old business, I have items A and B. I'd just like to swap them around. I think we need to deal with item 6B before 6A because it deals with the airport by guidelines, and we should, by our guidelines, actually come up with our own procedures before conducting business. And I see Phil Cummins, the airport director, has a remark in this regard, so please let us know what you're thinking.
If we could, we should put a change to the agenda. We're gonna strike 5B.
Okay, well, that shortens things up. Yeah, so in that regard, I'll amend what I was saying as my recommendation. We'll strike 5B, airport director. Yeah, and then we'll strike related item 7B from the agenda. So I would move that we change the agenda for tonight's meeting to strike item 5B, airport director position update from Phil Cummins, and its corollary under 7B for airport director position. I would also recommend that in the queue, we move up item 6B in place above item 6A. So 6B becomes 6A and 6A as it exists becomes 6B, if that's clear enough for folks. That's the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Discussion? Call for the vote. I'll take a poll around the table just to make it efficient. Chris Nordstrom.
Aye.
Steve Anderson.
Aye.
Eric Moons. Brian Cleary, aye. Brett Boyer. Aye. Mike Jankowski.
Aye.
Motion passes with 1 member absent. That's Tim Combrecht. Item carries and the agenda is amended accordingly. Next on the agenda is staff report, item 5, staff reports, updates. 5A is update on airport construction closures and related timelines for runway 624 rehabilitation and taxiway B4 addition. This is noted as our Dura engineers would bring forth and facilitate the discussion on this. So I'd invite you to come join us and
Okay.
and share what you're seeing. Where is there a good place to stand better than
That I'm not
Others?
blocking the,
maybe
so I
that's
have a PowerPoint that goes through the projects for this upcoming construction season at the airport. And there's two projects that we believe will be taking place at the same time. And I put the runway closures and kind of access plan together in a 5-sheet PowerPoint. So these projects, when they're constructed together, we tried to minimize impacts and closures to the airport. Are we having trouble?
for those participating at home. I just note we're having a little trouble bringing up the PowerPoint presentation on the screen, so bear with us.
Yeah, we can do it a little bit backwards. I usually do a staff report too for the airport on ongoing projects that don't have any associated graphics that go with that. And if we, I can do that first. to
That'd be
keep
great.
moving. So let's see here. Taxiway D North Phase 2 construction. This was a project that was constructed in, I think, 2021. And we're still working on closing it out. There were some issues between the contractor and the county, and we're still working on getting those finalized so we can close it out and the project can get the final paperwork done for the FAA. There's a Coeur d'Alene electrical improvement project. It involves the vault building. We reviewed it last month, but it's still on hold. We're waiting for delivery of a generator. We're anticipating the generator will come in July of this year, and that project then will tear down the old vault building and construct and move everything to the new or the existing and newer vault building on the north side. Snow removal equipment building, that project is just started construction again. The contractor TML Construction got their building permit on Monday and they started back up on Monday after a winter shutdown and getting the building into permitting at the county. We're hoping that the building will be up and ready for use, I would think, towards the end of August or early September. Let's see, ongoing runway 624 rehab design only project. Pretty much all the tasks in that project are getting close to being done because we bid it. We have issued a notice of award and it's just grant closeout and stuff will happen for that. Taxiway, but I guess with that project, there is an ongoing construction and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the county has awarded the project to the contractor, which is PO Asphalt, but the agreements haven't been issued or let yet because there is no grant quite yet for that project. The FAA will issue a grant in I would anticipate probably July or August for funding that project. Taxiway B pavement maintenance project, the county, it's a seal coat on the north taxiway, the full length of it, and a portion of the Stancraft, the apron in front of Stancraft, and the portion that is owned by the airport. Seal coating and restriping it, we bid it last month, open bids, received 4 bidders. And after review of the bids, the recommendation is to award it to the lowest bidder, Road Products, Inc. But that is upcoming. The county has not actually acted on the notice of award yet, but the county has received concurrence and award from the FAA to award the project to the low bidder. And they came in below the engineer's estimate by about 100,000. Prices are better this year. And then the next upcoming project is we're hoping to do a pre-design meeting with the FAA for the Taxiway C extension to the west from the existing box. And so Taxiway C is the old Foxtrot and Golf. It will go from Golf to the west. And we're hoping to start scoping that and get the design for bidding in next. I think next February is when we're planning to bid it. So design and do the geotech and survey and stuff over the summer to have it ready for bid next winter, and a construction of next late summer, early fall. Environmental assessment. Phil has asked us to start discussing with the FAA for an environmental assessment for commercial service, air traffic control tower, and land acquisition. This is still in the preliminary discussion stage with the FAA, and no action really has, other than trying to figure out what the FAA is going to require. I think that's pretty much it. Is there any questions you guys have on any of those things? Yes.
On the first taxiway, was it taxiway D? What was the issue? It's still outstanding.
The issue is an argument between the contractor and the county for extra work. And so it had to do with grass growing. They had to reseed, and who pays for the grass and how the reseeding was done. So there's, I believe the county attorney has been involved, and it's just trying to figure out who pays for that amount of grass that can grow. Are we ready? Yes. Was there anything else, I guess, on that list of stuff that's on?
No other questions?
So let me go back to the first one. So phase 1. So this, what I'm trying to show here is the entire airport, and it's really kind of hard to see the green lines, but the green lines are supposed to indicate areas of the airport that are open. So with phase 1 of this project, starting on, we're anticipating a start date of August 21st, and it's a 21 calendar day chunk of work, and it would just have taxiway N closed between half of the Stancraft apron and all the way up to the 24 and 20 end. And that would be to begin constructing taxiway Bravo 4, which is the new taxiway in between that taxiway, I guess it's J and D. To begin constructing that, and then to also do a seal coat on that portion of taxiway November and those aprons. So seal coat, and then also remark that half of the aprons.
Corey, can I
Yes.
ask if someone's got a pointer or something that you
Yeah, I was
can,
gonna ask the
That might
same
help.
thing.
I was thinking
a
that
laser can or something? Yeah.
I could point. So, Nick can come up here. So this is taxiway J, B4, and then Delta. So the seal coat is in this section, and then B4 is actually constructing this new taxiway in between here and here. If that is better
Yes,
for description.
yes.
Okay. So then the next slide, so the runways would both be open during this first 21-day chunk of out of the way. So the next part is when we would close off runway 624 for an 18 calendar days, and that is for the milling, pavement leveling. Basically, there's some grade issues on the pavement, repaving and then remarking that runway. And the 18 calendar days ends on September 29th. We're hoping it will be reopened at that point. And then during that time, the seal coat would be working at the same time where we would seal coat taxiway November, golf and hotel, and then remark those as well. So one thing to note is during this section, the Empire is going to be impacted and not be able to get out. We tried to make it so that Stancraft apron could get in and out on both closures when we're doing the seal coat on taxiway November. Anyhow, so that's phase 2. So it's basically that's a 3-week closure. Then if we go to the next one, within phase 2, in that 18-day closure, there'll be 3 non-consecutive days where up in the north end here, we'll need to, as a part of the 64 project, there's going to be new lights. We're going from the quartz lights to the what do we call LED lights now, and the quartz lights are old. They're kind of past their useful life. So in doing that, all the cans will stay the same, but they'll have to pull out the cable, put new transformers, cables, and light fixtures in. So they'll have to get into this intersecting section. And so those 3 non-consecutive days will need to get in there, put the new lights in, new reels in at this end, and then to restripe this portion because we're only fixing the grade from here to that end, and this end we're leaving for a future project. So those 3 non-consecutive days are planned so that there will be less impact on the airport for having, both runways closed for 3 days in a row. Any questions on that so far?
So with regard to the Stancraft apron, you mentioned that you're going to keep that open during the closure of the runway 624. Did
Well,
I understand that
we were
right?
trying to do that. So that it does involve Stancraft constructing. They had designed an extra piece of, so this is bigger than is actually shown on that drawing there because they designed their current apron ends right here and there isn't a second connection, but they have designed and approved this piece and that piece for them to construct on their own. So if they do that, then they are not, the in and out is not as impacted.
So they would
Does that make sense?
they would still be able to get over to runway 202? They'd use that north taxiway and get around the end there?
Yeah.
And that would be okay with the construction going on the runway?
Yeah.
Okay.
Except for those 3 non-consecutive days where you couldn't probably because they'll be striping that end
Okay.
and no way to get across there.
Or fully closed at that point,
Yeah, I mean, you can taxi around and do maintenance or something, but that's about it.
but you're not taking over the lands.
No, unless you're a helicopter.
Thank you.
All right, on to the next one. So then, after that, we'd open it back up, the runway would be marked, and 30 days after that, we have to go in and do grooving of that section of the runway, which takes 8 days, and so we have to close 64 again to get it re-grooved. So I'm thinking it would start like around October 28th for an 8-day section, open it back up, and then the final phase would be in the spring where the whole, you go one more. They remark, so close 624 again, and portions of taxiway November and restripe the whole thing for the final application of markings. They do 2 applications of markings. And that would be in the spring whenever, you know, the weather's good enough to do striping. You have to be above, I think, 60 degrees.
Do you go back one slide? So phase 3 starts in October
Yes.
for 8 calendar days,
Yes,
and they have rolling closures that
So-
begin a minimum of 30 days after paving.
yes.
So in terms of the months, it's 8 calendar days. So this is rolling closures like in November. Is that it?
So what I mean by rolling closures is like for crossing, so let's say this grooving machine, it goes perpendicular to the runway, so it goes back and forth, back and forth. So let's say they close off this chunk, I mean, the runway would be closed the whole time because it's a great big machine. But let's say these guys could move back and forth this way and you keep, you know, that chunk closed and try to open the crossings so they wouldn't have to taxi all the way around the end to get to these guys,
Hmm,
is what I would mean by rolling closures.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Did that bring us to the close of your slide presentation?
It did.
discussion?
That was it.
Are there any questions or
Do we
discussion?
have that slide deck in here, or we have to go online to get that?
We can, the airport has it in a PDF. You can, they can share it with the group of you. It's, yeah.
Well, and not only us, but anybody else that wants it.
Oh, yeah, it's. up there.
Thank you. Can you mind circulating to the airport board members and whoever else from the public who desire it? Thank you. So that brings us to the conclusion of item 5 on the agenda, staff reports updates. If you recall, our last meeting, because of some of the presentations that we had went a little over, we didn't get to some business on the agenda. So that brings us to agenda item 6 on tonight's agenda, old business. As we previously proved, we moved up what is listed as 6B to 6A. That's review airport board guidelines, the version from 5/21/2020. And the purpose is to solicit and discuss any airport board recommended changes and potentially take action on any such proposed changes. Normally, as chairman, I wouldn't try to control the discussion. It's not my desire, but there's a couple things under this, and for efficiency's sake, I would queue up a couple things that for your consideration, deliberation, and discussion. So I wrote these out, bear with me, just to make it more efficient. There's at least 4 items under the guidelines that I'd like you to just consider. So first, the guidelines provide that the airport board shall adopt rules of procedure before it transacts any of its business, and shall keep a written summary of its transactions of business and meetings. So what I read that is adopting rules of the road for how we operate our meetings. And as I alluded to in a prior meeting, I think it said Robert's Rules of Order, I would recommend being the framework, the procedural framework for efficiently conducting meetings. And therefore I recommend we adopt that as our rules of procedure. So I'm going to make a motion in that regard, seek a second, and then we can discuss whether or not that's a good idea or a bad idea, if you don't mind. I'm sorry, Kim.
We're on page 2. We're
On
on.
In what?
The
board
It's not a document, or the board guidelines.
Yeah, the board guidelines. It's stumping me now. I put it in my script, but don't ask me where it is in the board guidelines.
Under rules and
Here we
regs.
go.
Page 2.
Rules and records, that's what it is. And this one, I'm working from the one that has the stamp on it. I'm referring to what's been provided at the meeting is the airport board guidelines. But this one doesn't have, from my
Yeah,
observation, the stamp.
I don't think this one passed out is the one.
This is the older one from
This is the
2019, I
older one.
believe.
There's a newer one.
The
that-
one, I have one that's revised.
Steve
May
is looking at
21.
that right now, and that's what I work from. The language has not changed,
Yeah,
just so you know. But to find that in there, Steve, if you would be kind enough. In the current version, as I understand it, it's under rules and records on page 204. And so that's what I was reading from and quoted from, okay? So just to be precise about it. So I'm gonna move on this. I'd ask for a second once I finish the motion, and then we can discuss whether what I'm proposing is a good idea or a bad idea. So Robert's rules of order. I move that the airport board adopt Robert's rules of order as the rules of procedure for conducting our meetings. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Discussion?
Well, I, for one, don't know much about Robert's rules of orders. I know about decorum and not talking over somebody, so on and so forth, and letting the chairman handle the direction of the discussion. So there's going to be a learning curve here, I think, for some of us, as far as adhering to the Robert's rules of orders.
And I would agree with that. And so if you're willing to bear with us as we learn together or relearn together, I'm willing to do that. Seems like an appropriate way to conduct business in an orderly fashion.
I don't know if the county has, but they have little booklets that you can get that have Robert's rules of order, or you just pull it up online. That it'd be nice to have a copy of that.
Thanks.
But you got a copy.
Kim or Jonathan in the county offices were kind enough to email us that. I think Mike, you sent us something around too.
Yeah, I have that, but I just don't know how much of it is implemented in a meeting like this.
Exactly. We're fairly down to earth here. And I think that the guiding rules that you noted are the ones that really help us here, which is be nice. And I mean, that's the overriding rule, you know, be nice and don't interrupt. And the chairman is supposed to kind of help facilitate the flow of conversation. So, you know, follow the lead of that. And my role is not to cut people off, but to facilitate.
Yeah, what I want to avoid is referencing Robert's rules of orders and figure out, are we in or are we out? And then, so you guys are gonna have to.
I would
take the lead
avoid a
on
hyper-technical
Yeah.
application in every circumstance.
That's
and
what I'm
try to
hoping
go
for.
with the reasonable course, but they're a useful thing to have. And people frequently don't adopt them because they're like, that's too hard. And then when they get to the more challenging issues later on in the course of their dealings, they realize maybe we should have had those after all. And at that point, people are at odds potentially with each other and don't want to adopt them. So it's better to upfront kind of do it. Keep the rule of let's be polite. Let's let each person speak in turn and not interrupt, and everybody have their say in a respectful way. And I think those are the guidelines that I live by. And think we can live with that. And the hyper-technical application, I think we probably won't encounter circumstances like that.
The risk is that if you have a body that you have somebody that really knows the rules well, and you have some kind of a controversial thing, they can use those rules against, you know, the rest of the body. In this group, I'm not so worried about that. We're an advisory body, and so I don't think they're going to get too caught up in that. And so I think, you know, if we're generally following Robert's rule of order, it gives us some kind of guidelines to follow. But we're advisory, and so I don't see the risk isn't as high because we're an advisory body. So, but having something to follow is so.
Any other discussion?
I'd like to make a comment. You know, given that there really isn't much of an alternative, I suggest we sort of make a motion to adopt these, struggle along as best we can. And I think there's been a lot of emphasis on form over function with this board so far in the last several meetings. I feel like we haven't been able to really accomplish anything because we're really tied up with trying to deal with this. I suggest that we use these, we have the cheat sheet. I think Jonathan passes on to everyone, and if everybody can consult this on their own, and we can do the best we can with it and move on and get to the rest of the business we have to deal with.
So any other discussion? Frank, there's already a motion on the floor, it's been seconded, so the only thing left to end discussion's been had. Do I have a call for a vote? Hang on, let me just run.
I don't think you need to do a roll call vote every time.
Actually, the guidelines, Chris,
Do
they
they
say
say we
we're
have to do
supposed to poll every vote.
It does say that?
Yes, it does. Yes. Checked it.
Mr. Chairman, question?
So, yeah.
Can something be adopted by acclamation, given that there are no opposition opposing votes to it?
Well,
To expedite the process.
yeah, you ask for opposition and it's yeas and nays. And if it's in question, then you do a voice vote.
All votes shall be polled and recorded. That's right from the guidelines.
Well,
Yeah, okay.
all I'm saying is an acclamation would be a form of doing that, wouldn't it? In other words, if nobody objects.
Does anybody vote against? How's that?
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
I guess we could do it that way.
it's a way to expedite.
But
Move things-
Well,
move
maybe
things
we need a
along.
I could have done the poll by
clarification
now.
on what does this mean? I mean, most meetings, even with Robert's Rule of Orders, it's all in favor, aye, all opposed, no. And if there's a question about whether that's one way or the other, then you do a voice of poll vote by name. That's how I think.
So
most-
anyway, Frank's point is a good one. The procedural stuff, we're getting tangled up in our shorts, and we got a bunch of people out here waiting for us to get to the meat of the meeting. So let's.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I would say pass. Robert's rules of order will apply.
And then I think they add on to that, are there any nay votes or something like that?
Any nay votes? All right, I would say that the matter passes. Moving along. You know, the issue of minutes for the meetings has arisen. We're remiss on a couple of meetings. Usually airport staff helps with that. Currently, our guidelines don't make provision for secretary. I think we should have a secretary that takes the responsibility of working with airport staff to create the minutes for the meetings. And so in that regard, I would make a motion that we establish, in addition to the existing officers and the guidelines, a secretary position with the responsibility of working with airport staff to develop the meetings following our meetings. Do I have a second?
I'd like to second that motion and move that we appoint Chris as our
You're
secretary.
nominating.
Nominating Chris, so we can move things along.
Okay, we can-
I just wouldn't disagree with any of that.
That's a
except-
friendly amendment and, you know, as long as Chris isn't standing up saying no, or anybody else.
Okay,
So, okay, so that motion is amended. I would put out for a second.
second.
We have a
Second
second
motion.
discussion.
Well, what has been done in the past? Because I've seen this work efficiently without a secretary. And it's recorded.
Well, the reason we're doing it, Mike, is because Commissioner Duncan asked for an update last time. She clearly expected minutes, which we don't have. And this calls for us recording all of the motions and the votes that take place. And essentially, that's all we need the secretary to do, but someone needs to take responsibility for that. And I think in the past, maybe the airport has done that for us, but that's not their current charge, as I understand it. So, so if it's not, I made a commitment to Commissioner Duncan that next time we would have something that was available for them to see what transpired during the meeting.
So can we not have the staff keep the minutes and do that? Because
We're not,
usually they get trained.
yeah, but we're not supposed to direct the staff or to usurp the director's responsibilities. So, I mean, I don't know how that works.
Well, can we make that work?
I would hope.
Because it's worked in the past.
Mr. Chairman,
We had a problem with recording in the past meeting. I was unaware of so just recently.
Oh,
We have made some changes. It is being recorded now. We used to have our own recording equipment. But either way, it's being recorded and we'll get them transposed.
So Joan, you had a comment?
yeah, historically, we've always relied on staff to do that. The only problem I see is that ultimately I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, it's really something that the commissioners need. And because of the staffing issue here, with Linda leaving and resorting everything, I think they got a little bit behind. But I think you're on board now, right? To continue?
I would like to be, I just
Okay,
need
We're playing catch up.
some
now.
things.
if they can do
set
it,
up
then
first.
let's move on. We may be covered.
so can I make a comment?
Of course. we're in
Okay.
discussion.
Sure. Well, it sounds like in this case, there was an exception. And so the recording was not available. But had that not happened and the exception not taken place, then we would have had a record.
Right.
And at that point, Leslie would have received the information she wanted. I'm just concerned with building layers of structure
Well-
here that actually is an impediment to progress.
But do the commissioners want to watch a hour-long video in order to get the
No,
No,
information?
you don't.
No, they don't do that. That's
It'll
not
get
how it's been
transcribed by
done. in the
somebody?
past.
Yes.
No, it's an abbreviated in a
Okay,
tabular, so to speak, format where it's all, been like a court reporter. They take the information and they digest it down into something that's usable and abbreviated.
Or like a Cliff Notes version of the.
So
That's exactly
in light
right.
of the discussion, I'm gonna call for the vote. And we can vote against it because there's a motion pending on the floor. So I'm gonna call for the vote. All against, say no.
Okay, no,
No,
No. And all in favor, say aye. Okay, the motion fails.
okay,
So
that
no
works.
new secretary and we will continue on course the way we were.
So that's utilizing staff, make sure that we're recording and taking minutes and
Sure. Let's move to the next item, which appears as 6A, but is really 6B per our amendment tonight. And that's the February 22nd airport board poll. We kind of touched on it last time and identify and prioritize airport functions for airport board evaluation, and potential recommendations to the BOCC. We did kind of go over the results of that bit of a straw poll. And I wanted to just revisit that quickly. We don't have to act on those prioritizations tonight. We can just have discussion. But I put action under it just in case we're ready to do so. So I see Joan has her hand up. I would love to.
Are we done with this? Because there's some other things in here.
Oh, gosh, thank you.
Because this calls for 9 voting members, which we don't have.
Yeah, so Joan, you're correct. Correct. I'm sorry. I was hastened by Frank's remark over here. Or Mike's remark about us being on with it, and I just kind of skipped over the rest. So let me return to that.
Okay, so-
I'm pretty sure that this is not the latest
The-
version.
the
that the
newest-
commissioners adopted.
the newest version does have 7 voting.
It
It
does
does.
have 7 voting
Yes.
members on the
Yes.
newest version.
Yes.
This one is
Yeah.
not the newest.
So we satisfy that requirement then.
Yes.
Yes,
So yeah,
but it would be nice to take action on the correct
Yeah.
iteration of
I
this.
agree.
So another thing is that, I'll just reiterate, it did come up, there were questions raised about what is the role of alternates? That's the third thing under guidelines that I'd like to talk about, which is, what is the role of an alternate? Does that mean like if one of the voting members misses a meeting, the alternate steps in? It's clear from the direction we received from the Board of Commissioners at the outset of this board that that's not the case. It's if there's a vacancy in the board, meaning somebody falls off the board for whatever reason, then an alternate succeeds the position. How that occurs, I don't know how that occurs, but I would look to the Board of Commissioners to tell us who it is of those alternates that's going to succeed to that position. That's my reading of the guidelines. About filling appointments. They've already designated alternates, and it would just be to them to figure out which of the alternates fills the vacancy that occurs. So I don't know if you guys have any discussion on that, but that's how I look at that. If there is a vacancy, who fills it is an alternate.
My discussion would be, again, moving on, that we cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yeah, but I think it's good to have an understanding, you know.
I can make a comment on that. I queried Leslie directly on that. She said under no circumstances would an alternate ascend to a voting position. Because of an absence, it would be at the discretion of the county commissioners alone as to
Yeah.
whether an alternate or someone else would be appointed to that voting position should there be a resignation or absence.
Right, so moving on from that. Establishing subcommittees, the question came up of what is a quorum? You gotta figure out how many, the quorum is a majority of voting members under the guidelines, right?
Right.
So the non-voting technically isn't part of the quorum. I got some guidance from county legal on that. They said, actually, in an abundance of caution, to the open meeting laws, you ought to include non-voting alternates in counting whether a quorum exists. So I just want to make that clear. If we put together a committee, we're limited to 3, and that's the advice of the legal counsel.
Yeah, but that doesn't make any sense. If they don't vote, why would they be part of the quorum?
Well, in the interest of moving on, I will say that I have examined this issue through Jonathan with the legal counsel for the county.
Okay,
I have brought up the very point that you're raising, and county says in an abundance of caution, for
well,
the
what
open
does that
meeting
mean,
law,
abundance of
proceed as,
caution?
meaning
Okay,
any
well,
risk
it-
of violating the open meeting law.
It is clear here that the Board of Commissioners have to appoint any vacancies, and that could or could not be from an alternate.
Yeah.
That's the way I read it.
But we're moving on to another issue, which
Got
is
it.
what's a quorum.
Understood.
Okay.
So quorum.
And so when we designate a subcommittee, or when we determine whether there's a quorum for conducting the business of the board, the alternates count toward it. And the wrinkle to that is, and I don't think this will occur, but if we had, 3 board members, you need 4 for voting members for quorum. If, let's say we had 3 voting members, but 1 alternate, we actually could have business, but we can't undertake any official action. And I don't think we'll ever encounter it. I just wanted to clear the air.
Well, that would also mean if you're counting 9 as the maximum number, and that would be 5 as a quorum. So that means we could have up to 4 people in a subcommittee, and it wouldn't be a quorum. And therefore, you don't have to have an open meeting for that. Subcommittees can meet as long as there's no quorum.
So I think for purposes of just trying to move on from this, the issue's there.
Well, you
And I'm
mentioned the
gonna
idea of.
play it as the
subcommittee.
council told me, the
Yeah.
legal counsel told me.
No, I
which
understood,
is-
but you
just
you just talked about the subcommittee, and so that would actually improve things, because we could have more people on a subcommittee, which would be a good thing for discussion purposes.
Well, I'd look to Jonathan to answer that. Do we count to the quorum all 9 and say 4 is not a quorum, or what do we do?
The issue is Idaho code is very vague and a lot of stuff that is.
You think?
written. So a lot of these things they would have to go to court and get further decided. There's a lot what our business says.
Well, only if
So
somebody
because-
challenges it.
Because there hasn't been an issue yet, it's better to err on the safe side of everything, to lower any side of mitigate any type of risk for that. So in this case, even though a non-voting member, can't fill in and be a regular member, it still shouldn't be added on to avoid your at a quorum, you know what I'm saying? That's.
So if I have a subcommittee, how many people can I have on it before I violate the quorum?
3 snacks.
Thank you.
So
Brian,
even
I
though
have a
you're
comment.
saying for quorum purposes, we have 9.
I'm gonna wait till he's finished.
See, that's what I'm saying, that logic, that reasoning is opposite of what the logic would say. Erring on the side of caution would mean 7 voting members, and therefore a quorum is 4. So, okay, but I'll go with whatever the legal people said, I don't care. Fine with it.
I had the argument and I was told this is the way it is. And I'm a lawyer, but I'm not gonna differ with it. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, Joan brought up a very good point. This is not a current document.
I've got the current document.
Okay,
Let's,
but I don't have it.
Carrie, could you make a,
So can we table this until another time when everybody has the proper document?
Well, one of the things is we might not be able to do anything. So I'm saying,
Well-
why table it? Have to take it.
after all of us?
In the interest of moving on, I mean, we're spending a lot of time talking about a document that is not a current document.
I didn't provide the document.
Okay.
Provided the-
Yeah, I don't know where this came from. I don't have a problem with that. I just have a problem with discussing the
Yeah.
features of this document with it not being a current document.
And,
So-
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add to that, it's very difficult to come to this meeting without prior delivery of everything
Yeah.
that we're gonna be talking
Getting in at the
about.
last minute.
Because we can't be prepared properly.
So these were provided in advance of the last meeting. I provided by email
The
through
the old
John
version was, yeah.
the correct
Right.
versions. I made the assumption that people still had those emails prior to this meeting earlier today, but it was like one.
So this
I
one is
recirculated those.
The one with the
things.
stamp
Don't
on it?
interrupt
We've got some.
Someone who's speaking. It's not
I just
proper.
want to clarify before you move on, the stamped copy that you're talking about, we have a copy of that? We
I
just
sent that
Okay.
prior to the last
Good.
meeting.
Yes,
It arrived by email.
right.
I
I do have a
assumed-
copy of that, but we didn't yet, I mean, it showed up. so.
Yeah, I understand your concern, but I did circulate it, and today, just to be cautious, I recirculated to John and said, please forward this by email to the board members. I don't know if that went out that's fine. I hear your point. Okay,
So if you'd like to make a motion to table this to the next meeting.
I feel it's prudent. I don't see a document that's current here. So I make a motion to table the discussion on the Kootenai County Airport Advisory Board guidelines to a later date.
I'll second that motion.
all in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
All against?
Aye.
All in favor was aye.
Right.
All against is.
Oh, I thought you said
So,
again.
for being more expeditious next time, is there anything wrong with us reviewing the correct document? Maybe sending you what our comments are so they can be compiled and it can be faster to go over next time
Sure. If you want to do that, send it to John.
to Jonathan.
Yeah. Yeah, I got the 6A, which is 6B right now. The February 22nd poll, review the results. And I want to revisit that in case anybody want to have discussion about prioritization of subjects for the airport board, airport functions for the airport board to evaluate and make potential recommendations to the DOCC on it. So I presented the results. We have also the BOCC direction when we're appointed about if they feel are priorities. The question is, do you guys have any further discussion on? We really haven't discussed that stuff at a meeting. So I wanted to just bring that up and visit with you on it. So with that, I would just open the discussion.
Do you have the compiled results of that survey?
Yeah, I believe I circulated them before the last meeting, but I do have them again here.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
is everybody else?
Yes.
I mentioned, this was brought up in the last meeting, concern with the AWAS system, and that's not linked to the top four.
Mhm.
Have those assigned.
So where I had things from based on this results, which John doesn't have, but I'm gonna pass down to you. So
I have it.
you got it? Okay.
Well, I don't have it with me.
You know, one seemed to be to update the guidelines. So we just tabled that for the next meeting, but two seem to be the leasing application review process and criteria for leasing applications. The third rank seemed to be complaints management and resolution system. And the fourth seemed to be communication with airport stakeholders. Those seem to be the top four that came out of that based on my look at it.
Yeah.
Right? So I would suggest that would be the direction we move in. I'd open it for discussion to the group here, whether they feel differently or.
Is this the one you're looking at?
Yeah, that's right, Chris.
It says leasing is first.
First one was update to the airport board guidelines that had 7 high.
Oh, this has 8 high.
You see, yeah, but that's leasing.
Yeah.
Goes further down there to here.
Oh, there's another one?
No, no.
No,
Item
no,
number
what I'm
7.
saying is that this one has 8 voted as high. The first item,
Yeah,
which would make it number
Yeah,
1.
hang on.
Isn't it?
Yeah, but.
And then 7 would be number 2, I guess, which we tabled.
Which brings us back to leasing. So,
Right.
Oh,
so,
So I think as long as we've got the top 4 things identified,
Right.
we're on the right track, and to the extent that that is consistent with what Commissioner Matari gave us as direction, I think those ought to be our marching orders, and those are the things we ought to prioritize and get down to doing instead of.
Figuring out how we're
too. And in that vein, I would just say, is there any discussion beyond what we have?
Well, aside from the fact that the AWAS is kind of bumped down on the list. I don't see a problem with it, but I know that is an important issue with airport stakeholders. So I know we had some discussion on the AWAS, and I think Phil's doing some more fact finding and gathering of data. So I guess maybe because he's working on that and what would appear to be parallel, that would not be such an issue, but I just don't want that to get lost.
Not disappear.
Yeah.
So perhaps we could get a staff update from Phil in the future about where he stands. My understanding, talking to him about it, don't want me to put words in your mouth, speak up if I'm doing so, was, there's potential for this AWAS subject matter to, it's interrelated with your minimum rules and standards. And to the degree to which you do something with AWAS, you might have a associated effect or something. And it just sounded like something that was like, well, you better think about this a little more carefully. And I wanted Phil to just update us at some point on it. Is that about the gist?
Yeah, well, there's the liability side of it, which legal always wants to review. But right now, I talked with Dave Shuck of the Standpoint. We got a hold of their tech that they use for maintaining their facility. So I'm trying to gather all the information I can. I need to do a presentation to county legal and have them review it. I'm trying to dig up all the information I can. Some of the FAA systems are letting airports take over. That's great, but I want to know what it costs. I want to know what the liability associated with that is and the operation of it. So there's a lot more than just getting the AWAS. Yeah, no, we're working. In fact, I just talked to Dave Contractor the other day, so gathering all the information we can.
So that said, it won't just be disappeared, obviously, but it's more of a longer term thing that we need input on. And we can, these other things that we've identified as higher in the queue, so to speak, seem like things that are within our reach more short term, right? Talking about the leasing, the communications with stakeholders, complaints management resolution system. These seem more within our reach in the shorter term.
I was just gonna say, with what you read off, it was pretty clear from the survey of the group that those were the top four, and then the AWAS was right behind it. Two of the four I think we can handle fairly easy. One of them is communication with airport stakeholders, which will be ongoing. So AWAS will be shortly behind. So I think following what you had here was what we did is a good way to move.
Well, I do have a question or maybe a comment on this communication with airport stakeholders. I think judging from what's going on in the room here, I have not seen meetings this packed in a long time. So evidently there's some communication going on. What do we need to resolve that? How do we bring that one in for a landing? Because that one, I mean, I think it's in process right now and being done. So what do we need to put something in writing to make that happen?
Well, I think the way, right now, we're trying to rank and figure out what are the ones on the top of the list. I wouldn't propose how to deal with any one of them individually, but when we put it on the agenda, I think it's just something that we should have a discussion about. Hey, are things good the way they are? Have we, come to with this board? Do we feel things are going okay in terms of community stakeholder communication and leave it as such? Or do we have some tweaks that we might recommend, right? But I wouldn't talk about that now. I'd talk about when we put it on the agenda. Now we're just ranking. Frank?
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Mike talked about with the AWAS system. Both items 4 and 6 on this list, access to airport facility hangars and landing fee impacts on airport uses. There's actually ongoing work going on with those right now. Mike has been working with Phil on the access, and he speaks to that better than I. And the landing fee impacts, we've actually got an item on the business for that, so that's going to be coming up shortly. But I would emphasize that those 3 areas I think are fairly critical to the eyes of the stakeholders and the active users, people like me and Rick and other people in this room that are flying in this airport. AWAS especially is it's mounting in importance as we get closer to the summer season. Every summer it's fraught with excitement, new dangers, with mixed traffic coming in and out of here. So it's something we really want to put an emphasis on. We'd like to bring some kind of a resolution as quickly as possible. Phil's plenty aware of that. But, I would just like everybody to be aware that there are things already going on with those. So how the board chooses to deal with those, I don't know how much impact we're going to have on those. But, when they get closer to where we can bring them to fruition.
Well,
We'll
that's
certainly
truly,
bring them up for discussion.
sorry to interrupt, if the AWAS system is truly a safety concern, that needs to be the top priority. Period.
Yes.
As Phil has pointed out, there's a lot of moving parts to that. I respect his knowledge on it. We never really had a satisfactory dialogue with the previous airport manager about that. We were just told, no, it can't be done. Phil is receptive. He's been working actively with Mike and Kate on what alternatives we're going to have in order to get critical information appended back onto that AWAS, which is the number one concern we have. But it's certainly not laying fallow right now. We're working on it, even as we meet, so.
Well, that was my point. If I make a final comment on this, is the reason I brought that up is because there, like Frank says, there may be items being resolved as we speak, and that when we get to them. So when do we actually bring these up as discussion items and officially get to bump them off the list?
So here's what I would propose, because trying to say, let's do them in this order, I think is less important than identifying the priorities. And, as you're pointing out, I'm also hearing here, the AWAS system's important, but we need some details filled in. But it shouldn't disappear off the radar, sort of DuPont. So I think a staff update from Phil on this about progress in whatever discussions and research you're doing, the next meeting would be good. And also to kind of have it as a continuing agenda item, such that we stay on top of it, and we might not be able to act because we don't have enough information, but at least it's on the agenda, right? Do
I think
people feel comfortable with that as a general matter? Okay.
I think if anything, if we can just adopt a stance to keep driving these issues to resolution. And that's really what I think that's what Mike and I are saying, is that we're actively working, other people are actively working, but we sure want the board to be aware, this is an issue, this is a serious issue, and, the board wants to keep what we call top of mind awareness of it. And I think it's something that could be queried about every meeting, where we at with this particular issue.
So I would suggest that we do this. We have the poll results. Let's not definitively rank those things in a way that constrains us from doing them in some order or commits us to one order or another. Let's say that's our list of things. We want to continually revisit it throughout our meetings. And as to the issue about AWAS, we want to have it on the agenda so we get staff updates and we're apprised of it. And when it's appropriate, in our opinion, to make a recommendation, we can then take action on it. So it's continually under our noses as a subject. And then that, in light of what I'm saying, I don't think we need to take action on formally approving this priority list. I would say this is an ongoing discussion. We can revisit it and we don't need a vote. If you're all comfortable with that, I'd move on to the next item on the agenda. Chris,
One
I'm
further
sorry.
point, I'm confused as to how you come up with the list of the ordered list. Because like number 7 is got 7 highs and 2 lows. Seems like that should be higher than number 6, number 5, number 4.
So what I would suggest,
That's what
though,
I'm wondering.
is just what I just said, which is this is a list. Let's try not to think of it in terms of we're prioritizing in some order and schedule. It continues to be the list. We revisit it, and that addresses your concern about look, I don't understand how you interpreted these results and
Well,
ranked
no,
them
I
one
just,
way or the other.
maybe the math works. I'm just, because
Right.
sometimes you might subtract for a low or whatever. I just wonder how the numbers were determined.
I strictly compiled this based on people's poll results,
Right.
and then just kind of ranked it.
But you didn't put them on the list in any particular order? or-
Well, I have a suggestion. Let's just imagine that those numbers on that left-hand margin don't exist.
Okay, good. All right.
Okay,
That sounds,
Thanks,
that's,
That does it.
that's good.
And
I like it.
Brian?
Yeah.
So will that list appear each agenda on each?
I think we can do
agenda
that,
going
just
forward, so we can
just
start?
have that list as a.
Right.
I think it'd be a good idea.
Good. So if we're okay on that, anybody object to that, Frank?
Well, just one additional comment on items 1 and 2, the leasing application review process and complaints and adequate resolutions. I would remind the board that Commissioner Matari charged us with that task at the outset of this new board. So in my mind, they take a high priority.
And I think that's precisely the reason, in part, why I have it on tonight's agenda.
Yeah.
Right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay.
So with that, I'd like to turn to item 6C, which is review airport leasing process and appoint airport board subcommittee to recommend updates or changes for airport board consideration and action at the May airport board meeting. A little bit of a license on my part. I think a subcommittee would be useful to be able to have a discussion without a quorum. And I think some folks who know most about leasing, people who use the airport, things like that, should be on that subcommittee. So that's kind of the course I would suggest us going in. The thing that I did just to prepare and get familiar with the subject matter is kind of review existing leasing structure at the airport. So that consists of me just looking at the webpage. And leasing's under development, which is not intuitive to me to like go to development webpage, part of the page and look for the lease. Then you click on the lease and it comes up as a form to fill out, but there's no awareness of like, where does it go from here? And certain questions that one might ask about like, what happens if my lease application gets rejected? Do I get my deposit back? Things of this, it's not clear. And so I went to some other airports just to get myself familiar with how other people do it, right? And I see some other airports that do it in a way that actually looks like there's some good ideas there. They have it kind of tricked out. Like you come to that airport webpage, you're directly like can see what leasing is. You can look at a queue of people who may be applying for hangars where it's limited space. And basically in that queue, you can see where you are. Not all people who've applied actually own a plane. So when they come up, they may not take it, in which case the person next to me, well, it shows up right in the queue and sequences it. And there's some innovations from other examples, airports that might inform the subcommittee. And I think those are the kinds of things that should be looked into. So with that, I would just say to move through this subject matter, I would ultimately move to appoint such a subcommittee. I would ask for nominations to serve on that. We have 3, and that includes alternates. So before even moving on that, what I'd like to do is go a little bit out of order and just say, how do people feel about approaching this? Do you have some ideas about who should be on the subcommittee? Do you have problems with the subcommittee approach to this, or you want to approach it as a group? I think it's less efficient as a group. So I would trend that way. So let me just stop for a minute and just solicit your input.
Well, if anybody were to head that group up, I would say that Steve is the best qualified because he's gone through these leases frontwards and backwards and compared them. And then Frank would be a good one too. So I think that's a
So
start. But
internal audit.
Bruce, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just the intent of a lot of these issues at the airport to be looked at was not to make it this long drawn out process, but really to try to make it much more streamlined and easier to deal with. Part of the problem with the leases to address that was the fact that technically they were ground leases, okay? But they were presented in a way without any advisory board review and without the public's review. And I'll give you an example, the ground lease for commercial service with airports. It was positioned as a ground lease. It was brought before the board to be signed.
Your board.
Yeah, the VOCC, to be signed without the advisory board's review, without public comment or anything like that, for something as significant as commercial service. We had another lease where there would be a joint venture with the county for storage units. Again, the heading of the lease was called ground lease. Okay, so it didn't require the advisory board to review it. And it didn't require any other analysis or reviews prior to coming before the VOCC to sign it. And so the intent was, hey, we need to figure out a system here so that these things don't happen, or they come before the VOCC. And they're trying to ram it through, in essence, to get a signature first to figure out what the consequences are afterward. And that was really the nature of it. And I don't think we're gonna have that as much of an issue right now with the current management or administration of the airport. But it certainly was an issue before, just through actual experience. Some of these other issues, I would argue, instead of making a subcommittee, I would get an individual to do a review, maybe a 2 or 3 page write-up of their analysis, and then present that to the advisory board for the next meeting. And then you can have a discussion about it. If you want to make recommendations there and just push it off to the BOCC, go for it. If not, you can enter into a subcommittee or a full committee if you want. But this way you can kind of, address it and be a little more nimble with them as opposed to trying to coordinate with a group of people. I think it's much more challenging that way. I think like your review, Chairman Cleary on the, I went to the website, I filled it out, I looked at some other airports, would be the perfect example of how just running through it, grab some screenshots off of a website with maybe a recommendation, and then presenting that to the advisory board and saying, hey, this looks good, let's present this to the VOCC or, to the airport director, but through the VOCC. And I think that way you can kind of move a little quicker and not have too much discussion and debate about these things because they're not big issues. I think the AWAS is a bigger issue where you want more input on it, if that makes sense. That's just my 2 cents, but.
It's appreciated. Joan, you've been
So,
wanting to say something.
back to the leases, historically, the airport advisory board reviewed every single lease and made a recommendation to the VOCC.
If you don't mind me interrupting, do you mean
Yes.
ground leases or tenancy?
Both.
Oh, okay.
And that stopped a number of years ago, and so it created, I think, what you're concerned about. So I would like to have the board kind of think about what is appropriate for the advisory board to review and not review, like we used to, where we had not so many of those problems.
Any other discussion?
Could we get a definition of what ground lease versus tenancy lease means?
Is my understanding is, Steve, why don't you weigh in? You'd be more definitive on this, I think.
Well, every hangar out here is on airport property. And so in order to put a hangar up, you have to have a lease of the ground that's underneath that lease. And that works really well if you're just talking about hangars or maybe even an FBO. But it does not work very well if you're talking about off-airport things like carports and storage units, or putting a commercial service in here. It doesn't work well for those types of things. So a ground lease is simply what it says. It's the ground underneath. It's the ground underneath whatever improvement you plan to put on the airport property.
And a tenancy lease is.
Does the county have an internal auditor? Do they have an internal audit function?
You mean for the books?
Well, under the treasurer, is there somebody employed that goes out and audits particular departments on a recurring basis to analyze procedures to see if they're complying with defined procedures?
There's internal audits and then there's actually an external audit that's conducted. The airport, I don't know how much the airport falls under that because it's kind of its own entity. Money tends to go into the airport, but it doesn't tend to come back to the county that way.
Like, where I'm coming from, in my experience at corporate level, Steve can testify to this. I worked in the accounting and finance, and we had an active internal audit group that would go out to all different levels of the company, whether it was a mill or an administrative office or whatnot. And they would audit particular functions. For example, we might go to the accounts payable department, and they would go from the beginning of the process to the end of the process to see how things were being done, basically against a model that had been set up to say this is how they should be done. So, not being that familiar with governmental accounting, I didn't know if they had that kind of a function. If they did, to me, the logical starting point would be to have an internal auditor come in and flow chart the entire process and then present that to the airport advisory board. So it could be properly analyzed and then recommendations could be made to improve and streamline that process. But you have to have the stations, you have to have a starting point to say, okay, this is how it currently exists, and then you can define where it goes wrong from there.
Yeah, I think that that's more of a medium-term project, if it ends up being one. The challenge here is that there's a lot of moving pieces. We have largely a new airport advisory board. We have an interim director right now. And even some of the issues that were of my concern seem to have kind of faded away to a degree. However, that doesn't mean we can't just run through those processes. Like I said, one person do just an analysis, put together a short document, and let the board here look at it, and then either vote on the recommendation or put it back to more discussion. But as far as like an audit of the airport and things like that, that's just a bigger discussion.
No, that's exactly my point, is you have somebody that has some expertise in these areas that would come in and, based on their knowledge of how to investigate something like this, throw it together. Well, I'm just saying, if you had somebody like that available at the county level, that would be, to me, a logical story.
I don't think we have anyone that has that kind of time.
So you really don't have internal audit function at the county level.
Well, okay, that's not what I said.
Financial
What I
audit,
said
yes.
was that we have people who do these things, but I know they're very busy right now. And I don't believe part of their purview, and Phil, you might be able to chime in on this, is to do a regular audit of the airport.
When you're referring to leases, anything done there, and I haven't been through all the changes since I left. We had 2 leases. We had an airport airside lease. If you're on the flight line inside the fence, that's what you got. That was either private or commercial. That's pretty straightforward. We had an airport landside lease, and that was everything that was non-aviation outside the fence. I thought that was pretty simple. But when you guys start talking about going through the leases and doing audits on this stuff, I hope you understand, we've got several books, several thousand pages of federal regulations we need to adhere to. And we have 39 sponsors assurances that the commissioners sign every time we take a grant that says we're not going to disadvantage somebody. We're not, I mean, they've added 8 since I left in the past 2.5 years. All of those things have to be reviewed and adhered to when you do a lease. So there's a lot of things that people say, well, why do you have this in your lease? Well, it keeps us out of trouble with the guys that write the checks. And in short, that's what it is. So when you write a lease for somebody, whether it's a private hangar, they're pretty straightforward. It's not that difficult. When you get into the commercial stuff, the FBOs, the guys that are doing the electronics, they're technically they're an FBO, but they're a single-use facility, and then you do electronics. But they're still-
I think we're talking 2 different things, really. I'm not talking about the substance or the body of the lease. I'm just talking about the process, the initiation and the flow through the actual execution of the lease and what the steps are. And I thought that was what Bruce really wanted to see.
Why don't you and I talk about this
Okay.
offline, because we might be going off of the.
Exactly. We're in
this,
quarantine.
and I don't spend-
I actually envision this as a far simpler discussion, but Joan has a remark and then Brett, I understand you have a remark.
I have one too.
So
So let's go, Joan,
to Brian,
Brett, Mike.
to Brian's point, I think that maybe what the board should do is look at the procedural aspect of what happens when you're filling out a lease, where does it go from, point A to point B, and how does the consumer understand that process? And maybe that's our role as an advisory board.
That's exactly what I'm talking. Joan wants to leasing, wants to build a hangar on it. What is the process that Joan goes through from inception of the process all the way through to actual leasing of the ground through the hangar? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Not anything,
And
I mean, fairly high level.
And I suspect that staff has that process. And it's just maybe not on the website where the public can see what the process is. I don't know, but
Brett?
Well, I think, there's merit, every time you try to do like a subcommittee, it seems to take too long. I mean, we'll be out a long time trying to get people together, and so the idea, I kind of envision, this is not that Phil has time to do this, I don't know. Steve was involved, he does have a lot of information, but I see this as kind of like a memorandum or a staff report where you're gonna look at, okay, what's the history on this thing? So, because there are new people on this board that don't understand all of what's going on and where we currently are. So there needs to be, kind of a section of where we've come from, where we're at right now, and maybe some recommendations to hit some of these big items. We don't have to maybe solve all the world's problems with this, but hit some of the key issues so we can move on to some of the bigger issues. And so if it sounds like Steve has had, I remember you being in a lot of the meetings before when we went through this. I know Joan has a lot of experience, but I think it would need to involve having the staff, whether Phil or someone that has some knowledge there to say, okay, this is what's going on currently. And then put that kind of a presentation or something together for this group, or if we get it even before whatever meeting it is, so we can go through it, come with our comments, and then knock it out.
I think Steve would understand what I'm saying when I talk about flow charting process. I think you've been involved in some of that. That's a way to really simplify it. It makes it a lot easier to understand, what the flow is. And that's really what we want to do is say, what do we have? And then where do we need to go from here?
Mike?
Well, I think it's much simpler than what we're discussing. As I read it here, it says leasing application review process.
Okay.
So you have an applicant submit a lease, and you look at that lease and you look at the applicant, what they want to do, and you figure out if they're a good fit. And the good point is Atport, they weren't a good fit for being where they were or what they were trying to do, and so on and so forth. So I think that we've been charged with not going into the lease and changing the terms of the lease, because I'm not an attorney, I'm not qualified to do that. So why don't we just simplify that idea and say, look, we're here to examine the lease, examine the applicant, and find out if they're suitable for that lease.
And that's exactly what the board needs to do.
So that's what the agenda item says, but just technically to let you know, you're reading from the priority list. I put it as review airport leasing process. The only corollary to that was I was thinking maybe we appoint a subcommittee, but in light of the discussion and recommendations, I agree with people. It's simpler if one person perhaps works with Phil to just, and I'm looking at you, Steve.
I'd be happy to work with Phil.
And
so-
put a memo together and come back to us at our May meeting. if
I
you
would
can.
make a motion to that effect, that we appoint one person to evaluate the process, document it, and present us with options.
And I second that.
Okay, so
Can we pick somebody?
do you want to, I think Steve volunteered, so if I can state the
Or can
motion,
we vote on?
I'm gonna state the motion for you, so that the second or whatever, but it's basically to have an appointee who would be a designee, Steve Anderson, to write us a memo that essentially reviews the airport leasing process, and perhaps makes recommendations in regard to that. And bring that back to us at the May meeting for the consideration of the board. Do I have a second on that motion?
I second that.
I'll say, anybody who's in favor, say aye.
I
I was just going to see, are you okay doing that?
I'm fine with doing that. I'm fine with working with Phil. I think we can come up with
You're in.
something.
Okay, any nays? Okay, Steve, the motion carries and Steve is going to proceed accordingly. Thank you. Next is item on the agenda is 7, new business A, which is review and discuss airport landing fees and potential recommendations regarding same to the Board of County Commissioners. I'm going to turn this to Steve because he shared some information. I'd like him to.
I have a bunch of information here on the landing fees and comparatives, and we have I don't want it to get too confused, and I know that Frank has put effort in with Mike, and I think I'd like to hand off to Frank first, and then if he doesn't cover everything, then I will I'll step in and try to fill in any holes.
Frank, can
Well, I
you-
think we can tag team on this one.
Okay, that's fine.
You might talk first about the meeting that you had with Phil and Forest Service.
Okay, yeah,
Tag team as
Yeah.
well.
okay, yeah, I will start there. Because Phil asked me to join him in a meeting with the Forest Service. The Forest Service, among other things, is looking at additional property up there and the use of what they currently have. But during that meeting also came out that they and the region are concerned about the landing fees that they're paying here at this airport. And they came up with a document that I think maybe some of you have. They gave us this document, but it wasn't very easy to make the comparisons to all of the airplanes and all the airports that they had. So I put together a spreadsheet and I'd be happy to share that with any of you. But the long and the short of it is that the Coeur d'Alene Airport, if you look across the spectrum of airplanes that the Forest Service would expect to use, is almost twice as expensive as the next highest airport, that being Missoula. Now, when the Forest Service has an opportunity to stage their planes in different places, one of the considerations, of course, is the landing fees, and it can be significant depending on the number of fires that they have and all of that. So, so one of the things I hope that Frank's going to address is how do we come more in line with these other airports that the Forest Service also uses so that we can be competitive. And it's my understanding that the county commissioners want to be friendly to the Forest Service, and we get some benefits of having aircraft stationed here that serve the community. You know, the closer the airplanes are staged to where the fires are, the better off we are. So if it looks like, you know, don't mean to throw out a loaded word, but if it looks like we're gouging, and if you looked at these numbers, that would be a term that might come to mind. So that's simply on the charge per 1,000 pounds of weight that we're charging. The other issue remains that last year, the minimum weight that we started charging at was 8,000 pounds versus the 12,500 that had been the starting point for landing fees. And that's another thing that I think Frank and Mike have talked about. So just to summarize, if you look across the spectrum of aircraft and the airports, our weighted average landing fee is $4.21 per 1,000 pounds. Missoula's is $2.32. Mesa Grande is $1.87. La Grande is $1.35, and Moses Lake was $1.10. So those are what the numbers show.
Is that on here?
That's on this one.
Okay.
So anyway, I will hand off to Frank with having said that. And there's in your packets, I think there are other comparisons. I worked strictly off of what the Forest Service provided us to try to come up with something that was in common.
Question, are these numbers based on 12,500 pounds or less?
None, all of these aircraft that the Forest Service had on their list are more than 12,500 pounds. So,
But
no, in answer,
where is your starting threshold, I guess?
in answer to your question, our current rates are $2.75 for 8,000 to 40,000. I think it's going by memory here now, 360 for 40,000 to 80,000, and 80,000 and above was $4.40
Per 1,000 pounds.
per 1,000 pounds.
Over the minimum.
Right.
These are the rates set in the Board of Commissioners
Yes.
Resolution 2022-31.
Right.
That's what you're referring
Right.
Just regular.
to.
So,
Well, this presents an issue for the Forest Service, because I've had the experience of building with big BA-146 bombers out there, and we were allowed to put as much fuel on board as we could get on by the time they had them started. So they were cycling every 20 minutes. So if you have, you count how many landings one of those planes has in a day, and if they've got 2 or 3 or 4 of them working there at a time, it adds up to a pretty sizable chunk of change, such that I know Phil has had extensive discussions, and I'll let him chime in on this. They're seriously looking at, well, considering that cost element, we could probably lessen our cost of operations going to an alternate airport, even though they might have fires within the Coeur d'Alene district that they need to get to right away. They might be able to operate better out of, what you say, it was Grangeville or.
Well, it's really the contractors. We have 2 bombers assigned to Coeur d'Alene, we're gonna fire this area, they're gonna be. But the contractors that they pull in for support, they can go their own. And they went to the Forest Service last year and said, look, if this doesn't change, we're gonna start going to Missoula more, we're just gonna go to the Grand, they're willing to go to Moses Lake, for God's sake. Now, I think everybody should pay their fair share. I don't have a problem with that necessarily, right? And I think that the breakdown, the graduation on the poundage here is a little different than most airports do, but and that's fine. What I look at is how do we discern what's fair? The Forest Service first asked me to come to the meeting. I thought they said, we'd like to talk to you, and one of the issues is your landing fees. You're one of the highest in the country. And when I got to the meeting and the big boss was there, they reminded me that, no, the comment was, we're the highest in the country. Oh, I don't know how we got there, but when I look at everybody else, and they're going, yeah, well, we're twice. Their concern is, because the contractors, they can pick where they want to go for the night. Like, they can pick where they want to operate out. They don't have to come to this base. When you look at air mile wise compared to most of the major fires that fought out of Coeur d'Alene, they can easily be supported by other airports besides this base here. So when they lose that, you're not only lose well, in this case, $409 per landing. You're losing the fuel flow, you're losing the hotels that you guys are staying in overnight, you're losing the restaurant. There's more than just the landing fee. But they asked me a fair question. How did we arrive at this price? Well, of course, I wasn't here, so I can't answer that question. But I look at it and go, I think they should pay their fair share. I think this is well over the fair share. And I think we should take a look at the neighborhood and how everybody else has adjusted their fees, came up with their fees.
So Brian, if I could,
Sure.
and Brett, you might, I don't know, somehow I seem to remember that we exempted the Forest Service from these landing fees, at least the ones that were based here. And then I thought there was some kind of consideration for the contractors coming in also. I thought that was
Well,
what we had
I
presented.
understand that was discussed in the past, even when Greg and I ran the airport, it was
Mhm.
discussed when Steven got here. And I mean, it's up to the board. I won't tell you what to do. My feeling is, and the Forest Service doesn't have a problem paying landing fees. It's based off their landing weight, not their takeoff weight. There's some confusion on that too. However, you're right, these guys, with 2015, their highest state, they did 128 sorties. That was the category 2 tankers, not the little guys. 128 sorties. Now, that does a lot of damage to our runway. I mean, that's the bottom line. They understand that, they don't mind paying. It's discerning what is that fair share. And when we double what our next, I mean, Missoula is at $200. We're double that.
I don't, I was gonna say, I don't recall exempting them. And it's been some years since we did this, but I recall there were numbers brought in, and I don't know if it was our consultants. Was it TNO? Did you guys do anything with this?
I don't think we did, Brad.
Okay, I just remember, and we didn't make any decisions without having numbers, and so when I look at this, the Forest Service, and I I agree, we should be in a spot that's fair. But I'm always leery of just, if somebody just throws out numbers, and not to throw out that we need a rate study, but maybe we need a rate study to look at.
It's a bit of what we've done here. We've gone out, Phil and I talked about it, not only in the Forest Service. We looked at our landing fees for Port Lane, and we are the highest in Northwest, from what I can see, and we've been able to go out and query different fields to find out, for example, what they might charge per 1,000 pounds. Phelps is what, $2.10. Missoula is $2.48. Moses Lake, like he said, is all the way down to $1.10. I talked to both Libby and Deer Park today. They don't charge anything. Deer Park charges the Forest Service and their Department of Natural Resources to park aircraft there. And kind of to add insult to injury, when we dropped our weight category from 12.5 basement down to 8,000 pounds, we kind of created a lot of ill will among the general aviation community around the Northwest, specifically Addison Pemberton. I don't know if you know who Addison is, but he flies the nice old Brown Goose, and he's the guy that restored the Boeing B-40 mail plane. He came in here, got hit with a landing fee, and he wrote on the check and said, "I'll never come back in here again." And he's the kind of guy that's going to go out and tell everybody, "You don't want to go to that Fort Wayne airport because they're very unfriendly and just trying to gouge you." So it's not just Forest Service, it's in general. We want to take a look at raising that weight category back up so that we exempt, especially flyers like that, antique aircraft, air shows and whatnot. Just kind of re-examine the entire rate structure, which it's up for annual review anyway.
So if I might, so I think that as I was kind of nominated to take a look at that one section of the agenda here, Frank is probably prepared to put together draft up some kind of a resolution for our consideration with regard to landing fees and weight categories for us to consider.
It's already there.
And then for us to, if we agree on it after we've had a chance to review it, to bring that forward to the county commissioners as a resolution we'd like to adopt. So I think that's where we're at. But I would like to add one more thing because it was important in the meeting that Phil and I had with the Forest Service. It shouldn't drop between the cracks. The tower has been an issue here that we've been considering for some time. I mean, it's another one of the safety issues. And the Forest Service has made a definitive decision with regard to a tower for this summer. And rather than using the FAA tower guys, they're going to contract, and they're going to start with the beginning of the fire season, and they're going to contract for 2 weeks at a time. So that we don't have the one day we have a tower, the next day we don't know, you have to try to check the NOTAMs, and the NOTAMs change at the last minute. And so they're doing that on their nickel. They're going to have a contract tower in here. And they talked to Phil about, positioning it and doing some things to where we can have better comms than what we've had in the past by, resolving some of the radio issues. And I think that should be taken into consideration also as we consider them as a good neighbor and as someone that we're trying to treat fairly. So that is going to be something that we have this summer. It's not going to be a tower up in the air. It's still going to be a trailer on the ground, but it could be positioned in a better place maybe than what it was before, where they couldn't see where the taxiway, who was on what taxiway and who was holding for 10 minutes waiting for someone to come in and land. So that was the only other thing that I thought was relevant, and I think it plays into the total cost of them doing business out of this airport.
Any other discussion?
I have a question and maybe a comment. So Phil mentioned that there's additional wear and tear on runways when you have that much traffic coming in with those heavy movers and so on and so forth. And so I'm interested in finding out, because I don't know at this point, where the proceeds from the landing fees go. What cost center do they go into? Do they go into runway repair, or do they go into the general fund, or what happens with those landing fees? Where do they go?
They go into the expense of the airport.
They go as an additional revenue source.
But then that additional revenue source can be earmarked for a number of different things, right? Not just runway resurfacing or improvement or so on and so forth.
But now, and remember, when we need we need to do a project here. Generically, the FAA pays for 90%. The state pays for 2.5% to 5%, usually it's 5%. And the local tax supporting is 5% of that 1 million or 2 million or $4 million. So the revenues that we get off the airport here, including sale of land, everything stays at the airport.
Okay.
We're not totally self-sufficient. I mean, yeah, we broke even a few years. First, they don't give us credit for the taxes drawn on this thing. Anyway, and that's all part of it. And the thing about the bombers, they're taking off heavy, they're not coming back full. Right, but still, the landing weights are based on max landing weight. Some of them were adjusted at max takeoff weight, which is, in my opinion, fair. But that many cycles, I mean, 128 cycles of, I think we had ATRs, we had ATRs, we had the BAEs, the Aber 85, we had, 2 MD-87s. I think we even had a Herc or 2. But those kind of operations, they do put wear and tear on that runway. It's not like loaded cargo aircraft all the time. But, and that's why, I get looking at we're way up here, twice what everybody else is, and I think we should do this.
Well, I have another question. So can you link these increases that caused all the problems with the Forest Service with the minimum of the 12,500 when that changed? Did it all happen at the same time? If you go back to your accounting, can you point out where all of this problem happened?
Well, no, I mean, I wasn't here when it was done, so I have no idea what formula was used. I don't know how they derived that number.
No, but I can address that because I'm not part of the committee.
It's their meeting. I
agree. So, I can tell you where that number came from.
I don't have a problem with you share that information with us if you want to do it at the moment.
We dropped it from 12,500. This is the previous board that was approved by the county commissioners and such and so forth a number of years ago, because the air ambulances that come in here operating under Part 135 don't reach that 12.5. So there's a lot of quote unquote free money out there that everybody pays insurance for that is going towards air ambulance moving and this, that, and the other thing. So we, as a board, decided to drop it down to 8,000. But we also put in the caveat that if, Mike Gates' buddy was coming over with a use, they could call ahead of time and we get rid of all that. But that's where that number came from. But we didn't miss out on the air ambulance revenue that came in here and utilized the airport services after hours otherwise.
But that was 8,000. We're
the 405. And down to
Right,
8,000.
no, I understand.
So,
And where the 440 per 1,000 pound came from, I don't know.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know in case the information was out there.
And that's where an area rate study would give us. I think.
a word or two here, which is number one, I would just say,
Okay.
I know I opened up to one person on the floor, but I think it, just for efficiency's sake, if you don't mind, let's just keep it for public comment, but a remark or two here, which is, I go back to the governing, legal framework, which is this resolution 2022-31, it's in effect, right? And, it says airport fees get reviewed annually. That's optional. So it sounds like we're heading in that direction. Sounds like a guy who might be available and willing to kind of bring to the board information and present it would be Frank O'Connell, our alternate here. I think that's a good idea. I would ask that in doing so, some questions that I have, because I'm a bit of a neophyte, perhaps be considered, which is under the existing resolution 2022-31. It appears to me that there is room for the airport director to waive or allow additional items for justifiable cause. These are denoted in the rate sheet by an asterisk. I don't know whether the Forest Service support activities where they're flying in and out fall under that discretion of the airport director.
perhaps that's not wise to leave that much discretion, but as to the kind of special use aircraft that come in here, we alluded to, kind of like World War II bombers, things like that, where these folks feel, I'm not gonna come here and pay that, forget it. And then the word spreads throughout the community. It appears to me that the airport director does have discretion as to those kind of fees and whether or not that structure applies. And so why go to the trouble of bothering the DLCC if the airport director has the discretion? One question I have as to that type of use, hang on for a minute. So I'm distinguishing between the Forest Service issue and saying, hey, is there discretion of the airport director there under this rate sheet and the asterisks for certain things he has discretion over set fees? And B, it sure seems to me as to the recreational public community type uses, that there is that discretion. And so would you address that when you come back to us as well?
Sure. Yeah, Phil and I will be working on this.
Okay.
What we would like to do is basically answer, all these questions and come up with a revised schedule that we could then take down to BOCC and present as a resolution. Because you saw under the airport use fee section of this resolution, the numbers are blank, because one thing I did find in researching this, Phil found the same thing, is the landing fees are all over the place. There's no rhyme or reason. You would have thought sometime back, the Forest Service and the feds would have come back and said, well, we will pay a maximum amount of X landing fees in any airport that we utilize, but evidently they never got around to that, or they didn't feel that was their business, but it does leave a wide amount of discretion that we see to both Phil and the Board of County Commissioners as to what they wanted to charge for landing fees, not only for the Forest Service, but for anybody utilizing the airport. Because again, as we've seen, they're just all over the map.
So one follow-up comment, and this goes to you, a question you asked Mike about like, where's the money go, right? I would consult that resolution because down under subpart 5, it says airport use fee revenue shall be equally distributed between two airport funds. One fund shall be an airport capital fund and the second shall be the airport fund. And I think that's what Phil was alluding to earlier. I just want to put a fine point on it for you to answer your question. Okay? Yeah,
I did have another question though, is my understanding, and I may be wrong, that process for determining landing fees and who's landing here and who's not is automated. Is it?
That's correct.
Okay, so that puts additional burden on you, because here's the problem. Somebody comes in here and an automated system tags them as a user that needs to pay a landing fee. Then what if Phil's on vacation? Or, I mean, it's a mess. It sounds like a real mess to have that exemption process unless you know that the Confederate Air Force people are coming in or so on and so forth. But if you have itinerants like Addison Pemberton, how do you capture that?
It's not an easy thing.
No, it needs something that's a consideration.
I would ask that Frank kind of consider that as well in my remarks and give us some recommendations.
Not just a simple carve out for firefighting and
Yep,
World War II
Yep.
aircraft, antique aircraft.
That's it.
And that's really what we're talking about. That's what's on the resolution is to, and I have it on, it's just a handwritten in exclude flying and air shows is exempted by the airport. So if you have Air Expo and you bring in Confederate Air Force, and they would not be charged landing fees. But what Mike's saying is valid, is no matter who flies in and out of here, that camera's gonna capture, it's gonna generate a bill. And I don't envy Phil the review process to have to deal with that unless they had some way to furnish an exemption letter that you just sent back with the ticket from the company that collects that to say, okay, the airport has exempted me from that, so I don't have to pay it.
So
It picks up flybys and they didn't even touch us.
yeah.
So that picks up full planes. Yeah.
if I could just interject here, I think we've had a good informative discussion about this, but I want to close it out. And I would do so by moving that we designate Frank O'Connell as individual who would take a look into this issue of the fee rates and structure as it currently exists under Board of Commissioner Resolution 2022-31, take into account all the comments that we've heard here tonight and come back to us at the May meeting. Is that enough time? At the May meeting with any, I think Brett had a really good comment about, give us a little background in that memo about how we may have gotten to where we are. you know, what are the relevant inputs to the fees, and how we determine them. And come back with some recommendations as well, on the conclusory aspect of that memo, if that's not too tall an order. Is
Would it
that-
be acceptable then, you know, that in advance of the meeting, I provide you the information and as per Jones' request, gets disseminated and people can review it before we're in here, so that we've got some legwork done before we have to deal with it.
So I'd add to the motion to share that with Jonathan, and Jonathan from the county.
Okay.
And then he will speak to legal about whether we're in good keeping with the open meeting law by distributing it out. I'll leave it to him to distribute it to us, unless he wants to tell me now. But, can he share information with the entire board in a memo before the
We can
meeting?
share information with the board, because you're gonna talk about it in the meeting.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then, you know, stop
Just
your thought.
information.
This is kind of like the run-on motion.
Okay.
But,
I'll wait till-
no, you got the
Well, I
amendment,
just,
also friendly amendment.
something I'm wrestling with in my mind
Yeah.
here on this one, it's a little different kind of process. And that's setting the fees, and Frank, I don't know all of your interactions with this. I don't, if you're paying landing fees. So one thing that I just raises a red flag for me as we're doing this is if the person that is doing the rate study is also paying the rate, will the public look at that as you
Conflict
are
of interest.
a conflict of interest?
Frank, I don't hear you.
I just,
That's a
that,
good point to raise.
I'm struggling with that.
I have a 1,300-pound airplane now.
Yeah, so that's a good line.
I didn't know your
Yeah.
background. and
Well,
so, I
That's where he's.
I think that's one where we came back with the memo. That's something we can talk about. And also to the degree to which he feels like, well, I get it, declare conflict of interest, something to do so, but I think it doesn't detract from the desire to have someone look at this and make a recommendation to someone who has.
You sound very good with numbers and things
That's
like
what I
that.
get for a living. Rick, you know, the point is I can come back and say, based on Frank's personal opinion, the rate ought to be X. But at the end of the day, there's gonna be data there and you're gonna come back and say, no, I think it may be Y, or you know, may think it may be Z, and we have to come to a number that we stack hands on, that we can make a recommendation. And Phil certainly can be part of that process too, because he has to manage the whole thing. And the whole idea was, how this thing even got going with this Forest Service meeting is, but I think it kind of caught Phil by surprise, and then he realized that, you know, it's nice that we collect landing fees, but we really don't want to alienate, you know, the customer base. We should be something more commensurate with the market in the area, and I think that's the approach we're going to take. But again, it's going to be up to the group, and I can't even vote. So I can make a recommendation. I don't have
Stab
to
at that
say
motion
about it.
again if I can, because
I
it's going on, but it's just a motion that we designate Frank to take a look at the airport fees under resolution 2022-31 and come back to us with some description of background and analysis of what your thoughts are on that. Work with our airport interim director in the process and come back to us at the May meeting with something in writing, share with us beforehand. Make sure you copy Jonathan. That's the motion.
Seconded.
Discussion. I'm gonna go vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against, say nay. The motion carries. Thanks, Frank.
I
Appreciate
add
it.
one thing real quick, just to clear air, what Stephen did last week was perfect. He sent a document, said, can you share this with the board? I sent it to the board, we added it to the agenda. The board got to read it early. That'd be perfect, just.
Great.
like that.
All right, folks, we have one item under new business that's left. Question is whether we want to table it to another meeting or not. So it deals with the limited FBO provision, so.
I would like to see us act on that because this has been on the agenda like for 6 months.
Yeah.
Or more, even the previous board, and I think it's in all fairness, we should take some.
Okay, I just, as a courtesy, folks, I just wanted to mention that at the beginning, but I agree with you, John. I'm ready to push on. So let's take up item 7C, which is a proposed amendment to add a limited FBO, which is fixed base operator provision, to the airport rules and standards. Folks, you have the proposed rule amendment that was provided by our airport director prior to last meeting. I trust that you've gone through it. If you have any questions about it, I would encourage you to bring them up. And then go a little out of order, which is, maybe why don't we discuss it a little bit, see if people are comfortable and have questions. And when we get that on the floor, then we can craft the motion if it's appropriate.
So is there a way to tell what was in the original and what the changes are?
Chris, if you don't mind, I'll give you my copy of the existing airport rules and standards, and you
okay.
can see in that, there's two sections. There's
So
one,
this is the proposed change.
that's a proposed one, I believe, from what I can see. But here are the definitions as it exists now. And this proposes a change to the definitions to add a limited fixed base operator provision that defines it. And two, it then goes into the subsection on fixed base operators and adds a new subsection, which would be a limited fixed base operator and what they have to do to qualify, et cetera. So if you want my existing rules, you can look at those. And while you're doing that, if you don't mind, I would ask
Carry on.
people if they have any questions, concerns, please, let's discuss that.
Well, I do have some comments on this, and I'm not sure, after having talked with Shane and talked with Kirk, I'm not sure if this issue has gone away or if it's still there or what the issue is. And I see Joe's here too, but the way I understand this is that the airport here has defined what an FBO is. Our definition of an FBO is not what the FAA has for the definition of an FBO. We've modified that. And to me, it's both a contractual issue, because if Stancraft acted on Kootenai County's definition of an FBO, and now someone wants to do something that is different than what the airport has defined an FBO as, it seemingly could cause legal issues. But the problem was brought on by the fact that this airport has a specific definition of an FBO that goes beyond what the FAA has defined it. I think if, that being said, and if there's still a need to have something called a limited FBO, which the FAA doesn't even have a definition of that, but talking with Bill, there are other airports that have inserted that into their rules and regulations, rules and standards. If there's that need, there's some simple wording changes that might be able to address Shane's needs and Kirk's needs without going through a whole bunch of other modifications as were suggested by the airport director. So again, I say, I don't know, and since we're not allowing the public to speak at this point, Shane's not in a position to address that, or Joe's not in a position to address that. I don't want us to be trying to solve a problem that isn't a problem anymore. If it's still a problem, then we need to tackle it, and we should do it in the simplest way possible. And there is a simple way that's not what's in that document that you're looking at.
Can you suggest, just reiterate the simple way, if you have it?
The simple way is to define a limited fixed base operator or limited FBO as a commercial operator engaged in the sale of products, services, and facilities for or in support of piston-powered aircraft only, to include at a minimum the following activities at the airport: aviation fuel, avgas only, and aircraft lubricants, passenger crew and aircraft ground services, support and amenities, aircraft maintenance, and aircraft parking, tie down hangar. A limited FBO does not engage in the sale of products, services, and facilities for or in the support of aircraft other than piston-powered aircraft.
That's the proposed definition, I thought. That's the proposed definition in the proposed amendment, I thought.
That's my, well,
That's yours. Okay.
well,
Well, it's on the,
How does that differ from
it's on
this?
here.
I think it's exactly the same.
I have a question, Brian.
Can I just close that one out and
Yeah.
come back to you? If you could. you know, maybe I'm working for the wrong script here,
Yeah,
but my understanding was, see this? This is what I received from the airport staff, Phil and Kim emailed this to me. And it was, these are the proposed amendments, and it has in the definitions exactly what you just read.
word for word.
Yeah, word for word.
Okay,
And then, that's one amendment to the existing rules and standards, but then accompanying that.
so I didn't know if I'd offered this up before. I don't remember. I mean,
Maybe Phil could.
Getting old,
Phil,
but,
could you like this?
And mind you, whatever we do, one, I gotta run it by the FAA, and I gotta run it by county legal. The last thing I wanna do is support something that somebody else started that we should sue.
Did you run those things you sent to me and then I sent to the board that?
I was handed those when I got here. They're from that excerpt was from the previous management. And I did a cursory review of it, and everybody wanted a copy, so I gave everybody a copy. But it hasn't gone by the FAA, and it has not gone by county legal.
I think it needs, I think those probably are necessary, but just to conclude a thought here, thank you for your input, but Steve, also, there's an associated amendment that would add a section E to the existing rules and standards that is a limited fixed base operators, like sub chapter or something like that. I don't know if that's what you propose to.
I apologize. I read the wrong thing to you guys. I had added a section to this.
Okay,
So if I could,
sure.
after the words tie down hanger, I added a provision that says, provided that all other minimum standards described in this section are met, a commercial operator will also meet the definition of a limited fixed base operator or limited FBO without providing aviation fuel, so long as at least two other entities at the airport are providing fuel services. That was my intended.
So help me absorb that. Tell me why you wanted to perhaps make that proposal to this.
Well, because
Just in practical terms.
because if you didn't provide fuel, then you could not be an FBO. If you if you state that you're not going to provide fuel, you're not going to compete in that area, then you could be a limited FBO.
Okay.
So, but you can provide any or all of the other services. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just had a question, because this issue's kind of confused me. You know, I go out on my electronic flight bag, Garmin Pilot. And some of you probably use this, and some of you use ForeFlight. And I go to FBOs and I'll have fuel providers listed, which looking at Port of Lynn, we've got Stanton Jet Center. And I've got FBOs and other businesses. And from there, we have everybody else, Action Flying Service, Advanced Avionics Solutions, Port of Lynn Aviation and Maintenance, Unlimited Aviation. And I'm not really understanding what the controversy is around this in terms of, I mean, is limited FBO, the only thing we're looking at is how it's handled on the airport records? Is it an advertising issue? You know, is there a problem if somebody advertises on with AirNav that's limited, or is an FBO, that creates a legal problem? I don't understand what's really driving this. Because it seems to me when you start creating these little carve outs, pretty soon somebody else down the road says, well, you know, I want this kind of an FBO or that kind of a business designation on the airport. I went out to a KBZM, which is Bozeman. That's a pretty good sized airport. It's the busiest airport in the state of Montana now. You know, fully towered, you know, commercial service and whatnot. And I went to their definition of an FBO, and it was that long. You know, and they did say some things like have to provide fuel and maintenance, things like that. But I just question, you know, number one, that even the way we define FBO, I think it's very complicated relative to a lot of other airports. And then adding this layer on top of it, is that really in the best interest of the airport? I'm not in a position to say that. Phil and others are better judges of that, but it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me.
So
Before you go, Joan, if I could,
Sure.
Mike had something that he wanted to say, I think.
Yeah,
and I
okay.
can-
Well,
pass it
so
over.
I'm wondering if there's a specific condition present or has been present that would precipitate this section to be added. Because I'm with Frank here, I don't see what the reasoning behind it is. You're just creating another layer.
Well,
but is it actually necessary? Is there a current problem? Did this come about because there's a current problem that needs to be addressed, or is it, how did it happen?
So
Are you
Brett,
asking me?
No, I'm just asking
so Brett,
generally.
did it not start with D-zone?
With who?
D-zone,
No, I don't think so.
you don't think it started with D-zone?
I think it would be appropriate because the expert on that issue is sitting there and with Phil to have Shane or Joe weigh in on
Weigh in
this.
on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
We need to know what we're trying to.
is Shane here?
Shane's
I didn't
sitting
see
right,
Shane.
Shane's right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I wouldn't want to deny somebody commerce because of an issue here on the airport. I believe in competition and the whole thing. But I just need to understand how this fixes an existing problem.
I think 2 of the 3 people that would have a dog in this hunt are sitting in the room. The third one left a little while ago, but I think I would.
Would people be
suggest-
amenable to hearing from members of the public that?
I would be.
Yeah. If nobody has an objection, I think we should just hear it.
It falls under our mission statement.
Take it in the guise of we're interviewing. Yeah.
I don't know where it came from. Excuse me. I don't know where it came from. It was handed to me when I walked in the door. However, tonight I was told by the 2 guys that I guess this thing focused around, said it doesn't pencil for them to do it.
Doesn't what?
It doesn't pencil for them to do this, so
So it becomes a moot point.
good point. Unless Shane wants, and I don't understand where this whole thing came from necessarily. But I think maybe some discussion with the FAA on this specific topic. And some legal review before we go too far into this and put too much effort into something we probably can't do in the first place.
So I think actually this is the way I would resolve the discussion. I recognize that it was desirable to have discussion, Joan, but I think action is premature until we hear from some others. So I would like to table this at this point and put it on the next meeting's agenda. Did you have a comment? I'm sorry.
Can we hear from Shane?
Yeah, well, here's how I was gonna do it without even going out of order. I was gonna do it.
Sorry.
Gonna do it.
Part of public comment.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was gonna close this out and go right to public comment.
All right, thank you.
And that was the idea. So why don't we close out this discussion right now? We'll bring it up on the next meeting's agenda. And then that way we can go to public comment and hear from members of the public on this subject and
Another
other.
motion to move this to the next meeting.
If you'd like to do that, please make a
Motion to
motion.
move this item to the next meeting.
Second.
Discussion. A call for vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All,
I did have a question.
let's just finish the vote, okay? Do you want me to finish?
No, you go ahead. I get a
Does it
change.
matter? All against, say no. Motion to table this to the next meeting, or presumably May, carries. And Mike,
I know you and I talked about, you had mentioned you like to get public testimony on some of these issues. So then will that involve actually having Shannon and the others that are involved in this issue during as part of the agenda?
my very thoughts, which is we can put them on the agenda to appear, but tonight was part of public comment, which I'd like to move to. I think we can at least hear from them preliminarily, and if we feel they want to come in and give further, expand upon that further, we could just put them on the agenda as witnesses, if you will, testifying. This is nothing that formal, but I'm lacking a better way to describe it right now. So with that, I would move to public comment. Folks,
I have a public comment.
okay. Just state your name and.
My name is Harry Craviotto. I'm the president of the Coeur d'Alene Airport Association. And I would like you guys to put us back on the schedule for the agenda, because we missed this one, but the last one, we didn't get a chance to discuss anything. Also, I would like to thank you guys
the advisory board members for their vital role in the Coeur d'Alene Airport Association community and for the commissioners for the selection of a diverse board. We would like to establish Coeur d'Alene Airport as a friendly airport, pilots and aviation community members, as this has not been the case in past history, and we're not going to do it by what we've just seen here today with the Forest Service, by billing them double what they should be billed. Some of the Coeur d'Alene Airport Association interest is to establish a camera, some of our interest is to establish a camera system on top of a Bird Space Museum, which we can do very inexpensively. And we're going to present that at our board meeting tomorrow night so we can have a live camera feed on the airport, on the west, I guess the west side of the airport. Also, we had a great pancake breakfast at No Limits Aviation, and I want to thank Shane for the hangar space and and everything he did for us. Okay, we would like to invite everybody to our Coeur d'Alene Airport Association tomorrow night at the Hagedorn hangar. You guys want to come? Joe?
What time is it here? Don't tell you.
Oh, 5 o'clock tomorrow night, just like our advisory board here. And let's see, some of our concerns are the Cessna gate and fees of the airport, because that's been brought up already. Gate access to the user through the gate access, additional cards or some other way. I think we're going to get that rectified pretty soon. And then an accurate cost of the 139 airport operations. If we bring a charter company in here, how much is it going to cost us, less or more? And what does that look like to the taxpayers? I'm more concerned about the taxpayers. And then a turf landing strip out here, if we could have something for the tail draggers, because that does come into play. And then to have a review of the rules and standards to more reflect the Coeur d'Alene Airport's needs, not what is generically thrown on a rules and standards, because we have a lot of stuff in there that is covered by FAA regulations, so we really don't need to address some of that stuff that's in the rules and standards. And again, I want to thank the board for all their commitment and their time. And anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I know you've had your hand up, so please.
Tried for so long.
I
Trying to help you guys out here.
Thank you for your patience. I
okay.
appreciate it.
Greg G. Feller. I'm Greg G. Feller. I'm the tenant here on the airport. So here's the deal. If I was gonna wonder where landing fees came from and how those were set, I might be tempted to look at Sun Valley, Vail, Twin Falls, and maybe, I think it was Caldwell. So I think those were a lot higher, and that's where the numbers came from, because it was, oh, we're gonna turn it into another site. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's kind of how that came about. Secondly, limited FBO. That's really from the guys across the way here. They have a flight school. They wanted to sell fuel to service their planes and possibly other planes that came in. I don't know how you guys feel about it, Joe. The deal is that if they weren't classified as by being classified as a limited FBO, they get around the rest of the minimum standards, which means they have to have rental cars and all that other stuff available. So that was the reasoning. Now Phil says it doesn't pencil, so. That's what they told me today. So that may be good, but anyway, that's what I recall.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your patience
Oh, no
and
problem.
sharing that. Any other members of the public like to share?
Oh, I
Comments?
guess we're supposed to stand up here. The limited FBO thing, I'll address that
Share
real
your
quick.
name. Sorry. to interrupt
Oh,
you.
Shane Rogers,
Hi, Shane.
end user of the airport here. The limited FBO is, for some of you guys that don't understand where this came from, it's something that was going to be added, and as he pointed out, for a business on this airport. But if you go back to, if you just really dumb it down for everybody, and we go to the FAA's definition of an FBO, they provide about 10 items in that definition. Okay, rental cars could be fuel, maintenance, flight school, there's a lot of different things, crew car, parking, hangar parking, all of those types of things. Not one of those things are a mandatory thing in the definition of the FAA's FBO, not a single one of them. It says providing these types of services. I don't know the verbiage. I normally know it off the top of my head. I apologize. I wasn't prepared to talk on this. I figured the boys from Coeur d'Alene, I don't really have a dog in this fight right now, but I don't sell fuel. I don't necessarily want to sell fuel. I want to use fuel for myself. I think I'm the biggest 100 low lead provider or user on this field. So I am affected by fuel prices, but the limited FBO, a couple things for going forward for if somebody ever wants to get into this that I would see was a problem with the new verbiage or the proposed verbiage. There are a couple things. One, as a pilot, there is no such thing as a limited FBO. I've never been anywhere. I've flown in 3 different countries all over. When I'm flying along at whatever altitude I'm flying in that airplane and I need fuel, I pull up my iPad, I look on there, I go to the airport and I pull up fuel. I've got an app that I can literally push fuel and it provides me, would be Stancraft. I would pull into there, I would radio them 20 miles out, or like some of the people around here, an hour out there and talking to these guys, telling them I need my lunch and I need this and that and the other and fuel, and just that's a joke, but they do. So that's how some pilots do it, but they're gonna land and they're gonna go to Stancraft and they're gonna get fuel. If they're in a jet, that's where they're gonna go. They're the best in the business. They have an awesome facility. That's where they're going to go. Now, if I'm flying along and I'm in my Cessna 150 and I have a mag or a plug that's fouled, I'm going to go to that same thing. Where's my nearest airport? Nearest airport. What are the FBOs? Who's open on a Sunday? Because it's always Sunday when this something like this happens. After hours, who can help me to fix my solution? And I go to the FBO, not a limited FBO. There's no limited FBO tab. So anybody that's not an aviator in this room, I want you to understand that. There's FBOs or there's not FBOs. If you're an FBO, you provide some of these services. Now, as when you go on Stancraft's site on AirNav or Garmin Pilot or ForeFlight, and these are all apps that pilots use, and I'm helping some of you guys that may not be pilots, we utilize those day in and day out. We look at the services provided by those service providers. Okay, we can pay money to have a bigger ad and all of this different stuff, but at the end of the day, it provides those services. So for us to redefine the definition of an FBO in our minimum standards makes no sense. If you look at the new verbiage in there, and again, I don't have a dog in this fight, guys, but the way I read that, we're really opening ourselves up to legal because we're saying they can only provide services to piston-powered aircraft. Now, if I'm flying a Gulfstream or I'm flying, heck, even a Citation, I'm going to Stancraft. Again, beautiful facility, rental cars. You know, I can get a coffee, I can do all these things. I'm going there. But if I'm flying my Pilatus and I come to this airport and I want to park on resorts, or not, I'm sorry to say resort here, at Coeur d'Alene's ramp because they're cheaper than Stancraft, or Stancraft doesn't have a room, or whatever reason they want, because that burns Jet A, that cannot go on that ramp. Or we're opening ourselves up for legal battle in that. It's the way I interpret the new proposed verbiage in that as an end user, the way I look at that. You don't have to sell fuel. I utilize a facility on this airport for my business that has been an FBO since the beginning. Coeur d'Alene Aviation utilizes a facility on this airport that has been an FBO since the beginning. I don't provide fuel. I provide, depending on how you look at it, I think I probably provide more services than Stancraft. That's not taking anything away from Stancraft or Joe. Joe, again, we utilize Joe. They're great. I send people when they call me over there because I can't service them. But at the end of the day, that's how you got to look at that, is what is an FBO and what do you have to do? You don't have to provide fuel to be an FBO. There's a lot of airports in this country, and I'm rambling on, I apologize for this, but there's a lot of airports in this country that the cities or the counties have the fuel concession. That's the only thing they do, sell fuel at a self-serve pump. Guess what's at those airports? FBOs. They can't sell fuel because you can't compete with the city or the county, but there's FBOs there that do maintenance, rental cars, crew cars. I've got crew cars here, I've got maintenance, I've got all the other types of things. Again, I had an issue early on with the FBO. The 3 letters listed FBO in one of my advertisements that one of my employees put in there turned into a legal battle. We won't get into the details, but it should just be changed to the FAA's definition of FBO.
Thank you.
That's it.
Any other public comment?
Yes, Kirk Lauer here, Coeur d'Alene Aviation. If I could make a quick comment. Sorry, I had to leave the meeting early.
Sure. Hi, Kirk. Yes.
Hi
please.
there. Yes, we pushed for the limited FBO. This was something brought on by Stephen. It was a way for us to sell fuel. But we did not have actual fuel cost numbers until literally today. They were provided to us. That's where Phil's comment came from about it doesn't pencil. And once I saw the numbers after seeing the fuel flowage and all the taxes and things like that, it would cost us just a hair over, just dead cost, $60,000 a year between insurance, truck lease, and staffing. Believe it or not, right now, Coeur d'Alene has the cheapest 100 low lead at the self-service pump around. If you look at AirNav, it's cheaper than anyone right now. There's just flat out not enough margin in this to make it make sense. We would have to sell 92,000 gallons of 100 low lead per year to break even. So that is why we're no longer interested in limited FBO. I appreciate that it finally came up onto the meeting today, but that's why we're withdrawing from any interest in a limited FBO.
Thank you.
I didn't give his name.
Kirk Lauer.
Kirk Lauer. Yeah.
Any other public comment? And thank you, Kirk.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, if there is none, then I would move to adjournment, 10th item on the agenda. I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody against, say nay. All right, the motion carries to adjourn. Thank you.
Scott, had you wanted to say something tonight? You weren't planning on doing it?
Going to at some point.
Okay.
Aye.